So in the next hour, what we're going to cover is just a quick overview of the MedTech sector, although most of you probably already know enough about that. And then I'm going to cover the essential of the regulatory framework worldwide in terms of the different jurisdiction and what type of regulations and law apply in the different jurisdiction, cover some key concepts, and then we'll go on in the second half on the key requirements of what is the quality system, technical documentation, and the other supporting processes. Then we're going to cover then in the last probably third of the presentation a way to implement a document management system and a quality system on electronic format to have electronic records and electronic signatures. So MedTech is defined as any technology can be used in a care setting, which cover disposable capital equipment, surgical procedure, and so forth. So the market here is completely polarized. We have USA, almost half of it, Europe, 29%, 30%, and the rest spread around the globe. You're talking about, and this is a figure that is a few years old, you're talking about $400 billion market worldwide. So it's pretty profitable. So what is a medical device? So this is taken directly from the MDR, which is the medical device, the new medical device regulation in Europe, which is not that new anymore. And I've highlighted in bold the key concept and the key characteristics that make an object or something, an equipment, a medical device. It could be an instrument, apparatus, plant, or software itself, implant, reagent, or material, or other article, intended by the manufacturer to be used alone in combination for human beings for one of the more purposes. And these are very specific. So if you want to determine whether your device is a medical device, you have to see if it checks at one or more of these characteristics: diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, treatment, or alleviation of a disease. The same thing for disability, compensation or injury disability, investigation, replacement, modification of the anatomy, or physiological pathological process. So this covers the main definition of medical device, or for in vitro devices and provide information by means of in vitro examination of specimens, and which does not achieve this function by any pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic means, which means that is not a drug, or is not mainly a drug. Now, there is a bit more than a fine line then regarding the so-called combination devices, so that are devices that contain drugs or pharmacological principles, and in which case it depends on the exact purpose and exactly how it works, whether this is a medical device or is more part of the sort of packaging of the drug. The complexity is not something that you have to take into account to determine whether something is a medical device. It could be as simple as a tongue depressor, as complex as a pacemaker. It depends simply and solely by the using the definition. It depends on what it is intended to do. And it's just the intended use that determines if something is a medical device or not. Regulation framework. We have highlighted the main markets. Starting on the top left, we have Canada, USA. We also have smaller markets, but growing, like Brazil. Of course, we have the EU, China, Japan, and Australia. And this is what we're going to cover in the next few minutes. So who are the authorities? Who are the regulators in each of these jurisdictions? So the authorities here is intended to be the public body, the state-owned body that enforces, or in some cases actually defines the regulation and the law around medical devices. In Canada, we have Health Canada, FDA, you probably know about it in the US, Anvisa in Brazil, competent authorities in Europe. So it's we have one of them for each country of the European Union. So there is not a single one. We have the relatively new, it renamed NMPA in China, PMDA in Japan, and TG Australia in Australia, of course. So as I said, these are public bodies, not private institutions, that in certain cases have, in others don't, enforcing authority. So the FDA is a policing force in the US. The competent authorities are not policing force in Europe, for example. Now, the laws, the regulations, as I said, these are laws. These are not standard. This is the law. And of course, the law is different for every type of jurisdiction. There are medical device regulations in Canada, the Code of Federal Regulation in the US, RDCs in Brazil, the medical device regulation, and while still alive, the medical device directive in Europe. You have something similar called medical device regulation in China, ministerial ordinances in Japan, and therapeutic goods in Australia. And I said, these are laws, and these are very specific for each country. They are, in most cases, promoted and signed by the government. In Europe, it was the European Parliament. But this is very much countries or jurisdiction specific, and something that is required in one jurisdiction is not necessarily required in other ones. They go into level of details that, for course, like classification of devices, the post-market surveillance, the way to register a device, the way to report adverse events, complaints, things like that are very specific to each country, or pay fees. What are the fees to register a device? In terms of standards, standards instead are developed typically by a private organization, international organization that are not linked directly with any agency from any competent authority. So they act somehow independently, and they create these standards. There are thousands probably of standards that cover absolutely anything, and not just medical devices, of course. What happens is that the different agencies may decide that some of these standards are actually a good way to implement the regulations, the local regulation. The most famous one, of course, is ISO 13485. So ISO is an international organization that it doesn't really report directly to any country. Of course, they are in talk with the different government, the different agencies, but they are a totally independent organization. So ISO 13485 is mainly used and explicitly called in these areas, so Canada, Europe, and Australia. That doesn't mean that it has no value in the other one, but this is where it is probably directly mentioned in regulations in certain cases as a way to comply with the law. There is another relative, but it's not that recent, but it was in the last few years, under the sponsorship of the FDA, this program, the MDSAP, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, is a program that covers these countries, so Canada, US, Brazil, Australia, and Japan, because with this globalization, the different countries and different agencies have realized, quite obviously, that a lot of the requirements of each jurisdiction were pretty similar. So you can imagine a company who sells product in several parts of the world, they can potentially receive audits from each single country where they sell the device. And this is, besides being impractical, is redundant. So this program, that was a volunteer program, is still a volunteer program for each company, allows you to receive a single audit that covers one or more of these countries, and the other country, and this audit will cover the requirements of all of them. So in a single audit, you can cover all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries. Okay, it's basically based on 13485, but on top of that, there is a compendium. I can't remember exactly the name, but it is a companion. Sorry, it's a companion that you can find on the FDA website. That basically, it's I don't know, 100 pages that shows you the additional requirement that each country has on top 13485, and basically that's what you will be audited on, 13485 plus the delta. And it is important to note that you don't have to go with all the country. You can decide to get an MDSAP certificate for US and Canada, and that's it, and that will be what you will be audited on. So who are the additional countries that may join this MDSAP program in the future? So Europe is definitely there. Europe did not join the MDSAP program at the beginning, mainly for different reasons, but mainly because the MDR were being already written, they were in an advanced stage, so before joining the MDSAP program, they would probably wait a few years. And they are also considered one of the spectating countries. There are two agencies that are kind of watchers of this program. One is the Europe, and the other one is the World Health Organization. So the certificates are not valid for Europe yet, but in the next few years, it is possible that Europe will join the MDSAP program. It would make sense. So what is different between law and standard? So the law is very country specific. It talks about principles of safety and performance of the medical device. It talks about legal arrangement, registration, who the agencies are, how you classify a device. As I said, the fees that you have to pay for different devices for different services. The legal responsibilities, who is responsible for what, how to report complaints and adverse events, and the documentation requirement to submit typically for an application. The standards instead are, as I said, developed by independent organizations. They are not country specific. Countries may adopt them, but in some cases there are modifications. Like, for example, with 13485, there is a European version of 13485 that has some slight differences. They talk about quality system processes, typically, and they can also be very technical in nature, for example, 6601, and give you this presumption of conformity. So what is presumption of conformity? So at the end of the day, you have to comply to the laws of each country. But if you follow certain standards that each country or each jurisdiction will highlight or list, you have this presumption of compliance to the specific part of the regulation. Meaning that, for example, 13485, if you apply 13485, you have a quality system based on 13485, and you get a certificate of compliance to 13485, then there is a presumption of compliance in different countries and different jurisdictions that you comply to the requirements of the quality system. Okay, so it doesn't cover everything. It doesn't mean that if you comply to 13485, you're automatically compliant to everything that is in the MDR or 21 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulation, but it covers part of that. It is important to note, as I said, you have the obligation to comply with the full regulations. There are two links here that you can use to give a look at what these standards are. They're called harmonized standards in Europe and recognized consensus standards in the US. And the lists are pretty long, especially the one in the US, as I said. So it's not mandatory that you comply to them, but probably you should, if you could, because it's a way to show that you are compliant. So you don't have to figure out a way to comply it yourself. You don't need to create a new method. You just use the standard, for example. And this typically, the typical example are 13485 for the quality system, 14971 for risk management, 6234 for software development, and 661 for general performance and safety of medical electrical equipment. So as I mentioned, 661 is pretty technical in nature. So if you want to prove that your device is electrically safe, rather than trying to figure out yourself what the requirements are, what the the tests that you should be doing are, what are the limits are, it would be much simpler to go to 661 and say, okay, I'll follow that, so I have a presumption of compliance. Right, general requirement. These are the general requirements of the quality system. These are kind of independent of the specific local laws. These are kind of what every company should have. We have a quality system. Some requirements are typically quite flat in terms of requirements. Some requirements may be waived for low-risk devices. You have a requirement that you have to have a process of post-market surveillance. So you have to monitor the performance of the device on the field, in particular for things like complaints and incidents, and react to these events as appropriate. You have an obligation of reporting certain type of events, complaints, reduction, adverse events, to the local authorities. And in some cases, you may have the obligation to have a periodic reporting. And of course, you have a requirement to register the device, which typically is defined in the law as the requirement for the submission of the approval and how you receive an approval from the local authority and what are the conditions under which this approval is still valid. And of course, there are general requirements of evidence and documentation that are required to demonstrate compliance to all the other points. Going specifically into point 1, the quality system, just to give a very high level of what the requirements are. It will describe the general documentation requirements, the role of management. It's very important from a quality system standpoint that the management has ultimately very prominent role in the organization. It's not the fact that management was not aware that something was happening or, well, it's not their fault. So they are ultimately responsible for what happens at any level of the company. There are requirements about resources, including human resources, but not necessarily only for human resources. There are requirements around how to design, develop, and manufacture, if applicable, a product. And there are requirements then on monitoring the system and the product and the improvement to the product and to the system. So let's go now into documentation management, which was the first point here. One of the requirements of documentation, regardless of what type of documentation you need to put together, is that it has to be controlled. What does it mean? So starting with 13485, it says that documents have to be reviewed and approved prior to being issued, so prior to people being able to use them. Have to review them and update them as necessary, and then they have to go through the same process of review and approval. You have to ensure that the current review status of changes to documents are identified, meaning that you have to make sure that people have access to the latest approved version. That, of course, the relevant versions are applicable at the point of use, so it can't just be, how can I say, a quality system that is up in the sky and people don't have access to it and they can't use it. The other points are more related to physical documentation, but even for electronic record, they have some meaning. So the documents remain legible and really identifiable. In this case, it means that documents should not be, or files should not be corrupted. Documents of external origins are controlled in a similar way. So if you claim compliance to 13485, well, you are expected to have a copy of 13485. How do you manage it? How do you make sure that you have the latest copy? And how do people have access to it, people that may need to use it? Prevent deterioration of loss of documents. It's part of remain legible. So we're talking about corruption if you're talking about an electronic document management system. And prevent the unintended use of obsolete document. Meaning that if you obsolete a document or you create a new version and this new version is approved, you have to make sure that people don't use either a retired document or don't use an older version. These are the general requirements. They're pretty obvious, but it's when you have to try to implement that things get a little bit more complicated. So in the US, 21 CFR 20.40. So 20 is the part that talks about quality system of 21 CFR, and .40 is this clause that talks about document management. It's very similar, although it has some slightly different things. For example, it talks more about designating certain people to approve the documents prior to use, and the fact that not necessarily the same people, but the same function should approve any change to the document. So if for example, if the first version of the document was approved by engineering, the second version can be approved by marketing. It doesn't really make that much sense. It's not the same people, but the same functions. They talk also about the date and signature of the individual. So they explain exactly what approval means. Obsolete documents should promptly removed. This is already covered in 1345. Changes, as I mentioned, it talks about same function of organization. And changes should be communicated to the appropriate personnel. So it means that if something has changed, you have to make sure that this is distributed, but not just the new document, that the knowledge that there is a new version of a certain document is spread around the organization. And it goes a little bit more in details on the change records as well. It tells you that the records of the change should include the description of the change, what is affected, or signature and identification of the people who have approved it, the approval date, and the approval of when something becomes effective. There is one additional part of the Code of Federal Regulation that you have to comply for electronic systems if you operate in the US, and it is this 21 CFR 11. It was created long ago. I think it originally was in the 70s, but it's very demanding, and it regulates or it describes the requirement for electronic records and electronic signatures. There is no such equivalent at the moment in Europe. And as I said, this is very demanding. So if you want to enter the US market, you have to make sure that you comply to this piece of regulation. What are electronic records and electronic signatures? So these are the definition. Electronic record means any combination of text, graphic, data files, or electronic version of a physical document, basically, but it could be more than a document. It could be a specification. It could be data from a test. It could be absolutely anything. An electronic signature is the electronic equivalent of the handwritten signature. This doesn't mean that is an image of the signature that is placed at the bottom of the document. Here is a digital signature at all effects that is assigned to you, and you use it to approve documents. And it is unique to you, and it, as it says here at the bottom, it's legally binding and in the same way of a handwritten signature. So when you type in your username and password, you be careful, because it is, in certain cases, the same as signing a document. It has the same meaning. Right, so I'm gonna move, I don't know if there are questions, Mari, that we can cover right now. Otherwise, I will move to the demo of the document management system.
No questions at the moment. Jean-Luc was updating some of the information that you said. MDSAP is now having 7 countries. So thank you for that information, Jean-Luc. Korea and Argentina have also joined the MDSAP. And then we can probably discuss the MDSAP afterwards if anybody is more interested in,
yes,
in how this works. So we are now going to look into how to implement a compliant quality management system in Confluence. Right.
Yeah, give me a second.
And if anybody else has any questions, then feel free to write them in the Q&A or chat or anywhere where you can write.
Right, I'm sharing my screen again now. Let me know when you can see it.
Yep.
Okay.
Now.
So, some of you will be familiar with a company called Atlassian. They are developers of software tools that are used very extensively for software development, not only for medical devices, but actually mostly not for medical devices. They're very popular, and the main reason of their popularity is that the entry level, the cost of the entry level tools is incredibly cheap. In some cases, it is actually free. So it is a very good choice for smaller company or startups or things like that. Our system that I'm going to present is called MediCompli. It is a solution, and it's based on this object or this product called Atlassian Confluence. Confluence is a wiki, it's a document management system. It's one of the characteristics of these Atlassian tools is that they're extremely flexible. You can do absolutely whatever you want with it. At the same time, flexibility means that when you use them, when you get them, they are typically not very configured. So you have to figure out the configuration yourself depending on what you use them for. So what we did is that we took this Confluence object and we built around other add-ons and configuration to make it 21 CFR 11 compliant. So what I'm going to show you is a document management system that is completely 21 CFR 11 compliant, and it is based on this object called Atlassian Confluence. So the whole system is comprised of 3 modules on top of the Confluence itself. One is the quality system itself, so procedures, templates, and so forth. Module B is the core of the automation, so we are talking about workflows, electronic signatures, and module C is an access management module, a very small one, but it covers certain areas of 21 CFR 11 that otherwise Confluence itself would not have. For example, password complexity, for example, the fact that after a certain number of unsuccessful login attempts, an account is locked down, the fact that the password expires every X months, things like that are pretty obvious, but Confluence itself does not have it. That's why we put it all together to make something compliant. So this is the console. This is what you see when you log in into our system. And it is comprised of mainly 4 parts. One is the quality system itself, so the documentation. And then we have 3 submodules that are about records, and in particular, the most used ones like CAPA, change management, and training. So going into the quality system, what is the quality system and what does it look like? We have these spaces that is the name that is used in Confluence to define something like a folder, and pages that is the kind of the equivalent of a document. So you have in this space called eQMS publish, and I'll explain you in a second the reason. And you have documentation that starts with the change history. This is the change history of the QMS because we publish regular updates, so we keep people informed of the change in the content. We have a number of guidance documents that good practices. They're not intended to be controlled documents, but you can use them if you wish. And then we have quality manual, the policy, procedures, and templates. The advantage of using a system like that is that it's almost completely pre-filled. And I just bring in the example of the quality manual. There are some parts of the quality manual and the procedure in general that really depends on the company structure, the best practices, the where you are selling your device or planning to sell your device, the type of device and things like that. But there is guidance to put this together, and these are all information that you probably have. The quality manual, what is the quality manual? If you don't know, well, the quality manual is kind of a manual of how you intend to comply to the different regulation, and typically is structured either around 1345 or 21 CFR 820, although there are extensive similarities. Quality policy, it's pretty much empty because you really want to depend what you want to say, but this is kind of a commitment from the management to the compliance and to the how you maintain the compliance of the quality system. And it's also something that you should be distributed downstream to every employee. So employees should be aware of this quality policy. The core of the system is about 20 SOP, keeps on growing, there's more and more. That covers all the aspects of a quality system. In addition, we have a regulatory process SOP that is specific to the more legal aspects of the regulations in this case. And at the moment they cover US, EU, and Canada. And they cover things like registration, reporting, submission, classification, as I said, things that are specific to the local regulations. The system that we design is very much focused on the development of a device. And we have this device lifecycle SOP that is mostly comprised of what is called design controls that drives, that guides a user through the different steps that are required to put together to develop a device, first of all, and to demonstrate the compliance to the regulation. And it includes, of course, 1345, 21 CFR 20, but also 62304. So if your device is software or contains software, this standard, EN or IEC 62304 is not an ISO standard, defines the development method for medical device software. It is a sort of 1335, but very much focused on software, and it is very specific in certain cases in the details and in the requirement. Of course, you can use the same system if you don't have software, but anything marked that here, for example, is marked in red means that it's specific for software. We have about 50, 60 templates. I can't remember again. They keep on growing. Oh, actually, sorry, I forgot to mention, recent addition to the quality system is a procedure for cybersecurity. So here we're not talking about, I don't know if you're familiar to about 27001. This is not data security or IT system security. Here we're talking about product security. There are regular guidance documents, sorry, from the FDA that are define a lot of requirements related to cybersecurity. There are especially two. One is about pre-market, and the other one is post-market. But if you Google FDA cybersecurity, you would be guided to a page that contains all the links. In Europe, Europe is a little bit behind in terms of defining an exact and shared framework in terms of cybersecurity, but there are different standards that you can use. One of the best one that I would say is called Tier 57. And it is mostly related to risk management, but again, it's a guidance. Another one that you can use, again, for risk management, because risk management is a big part of the cybersecurity, is the NIST special publication 800. I can't remember if it's 30 or 53, but NIST, this guidance is very thick, first of all, and it's very broad. It covers cybersecurity in every type of industry. But it's very good at defining how you can carry out a risk management or risk analysis activities for cybersecurity, because it's quite different from what you probably are used in terms of just patient or user safety. Another one that I've used recently is the UL 2900 series. So this is a standard that was developed by UL Underwriters Laboratories, which are, amongst other things, a notified body, which is very intense, meaning that it takes the requirements of most of the requirements of the FDA and makes them a shall must. It's kind of almost the gold standard. It's pretty demanding. Give a look at it if you want, but the FDA guidance documents are pretty good. Recently, at the end of last year, there is guidance that was released in the European Union as well, an MDCG 2019-16, I think, that is about cybersecurity. And it's very good. I would recommend that if you're new to cybersecurity, give a look at it, because it kind of gives you the generic principles and the kind of an idea, will give you an idea if you're new to this type of aspects about what cybersecurity is and what the requirements in general would be, and then you can move to the FTA guidance document. Going back to the content, so we have documentation, we have templates, and they cover all aspects of the quality system. Again, a lot of that is focused, all of these templates are focused, I'll say half of it, they are focused on product development. And although they are templates, they're quite detailed in terms of content, because we're trying to guide relatively lay users through the process in the least painful manner. We also provide what we call an eQMS example. And this eQMS example is more or less a copy of what you've just seen, but it is populated. So especially for template, it's quite good if somebody eventually, yes, I can understand this, yes, I can use the template, but still have doubts. Well, this is an example. It is a real life example. This is, most of these examples actually come from real life devices, and they are very, I would say that they are very, very useful in terms of how to populate and how to generate compliant technical documentation. Now, moving to module B, so the automation, we're not going to cover module C because it's pretty simple, but the automation workflows and electronic signatures. How do they work? So the system is divided in two. And if you remember what I presented earlier regarding the fact that people, the normal user should not have access to older versions or draft, and they always should have access to the latest approved version. This is how these things were divided. There is a draft space and there is a publish space. And the draft is where only certain people have access. They can edit documents, they make changes, they approve it, and then this gets published in a read-only space where everybody has access, and everybody should have access, but it's a space that is read-only, and people can see only the latest approved version. Now, I'm going to create let me see. I'm going to create an empty document and show you how this works. It's very, very simple. These are pre-configured workflows that you will receive if you go with this solution. But remember that you can always create your own or modify them. The system is completely open, meaning that it is a configuration that what we provide, but somebody can go in and completely revolutionize it or add, remove, change, no problem. So let's say that I am creating a new SOP. I add some content. At the moment, I'm just not adding really anything. The system has its own editor, which is quite complete, but is also very compatible with Office files. So you can see that there is a state machine behind it. The document is in a draft state. The system will ask you to set some parameters. We are not going to cover it today, but just show you how a workflow, like compliant workflows work. So, although it's not really written anywhere that is a requirement, if you're working with something like an SOP, a procedure, and these are called documents, quality documents, you have to consider whether you want to trigger a change request. So the change management system is very high level, because if for changes, anything can be a change. The fact that you release a new procedure, the fact that you change a procedure, but also you release a product, you change the IT infrastructure, anything could be considered a change. If you just change a small document, you probably don't need to go to a full-scale change management system, but if you change something like a procedure, this may have a lot of impacts. So typically, a quality management system includes this change management process that will force you to go through certain steps and tell you, okay, this is the change that you want to do. Did you think about what else is impacted? Did you think about what the downstream effects are? Do you need to notify something? Is it something that affects the product in the field? All sorts of questions have to be ticked. And especially when you change, as I said, a procedure, introduce a new procedure, you need to make sure that you consider all the effects that this has. For example, do you need to update other procedures? Do you need to create a training to train people? And the answer is yes. Does it have effects on existing product? What do you do with projects that are in process? Do you apply it immediately? So there are a lot of things that have to be considered, and the system is designed to make you think about all these things and not just go in and release a document. So that's why it asks you to create this change request. And where
If
you
I
will
may
do this.
jump in, Matteo, just it is a question that we just got from Ricardo that actually does go into the topic that we are discussing at the moment. The question is, where do you take the SOP number from?
You can do it manually at the moment. It's the title of the document. You can do it the way you want, but in terms of numbering, the system itself does not have any numbering, and it's not necessarily required to have numbering, considering that the system, Confluence itself, is very good at linking documents with each other, hyperlinks and things like that. So it's very easy to navigate it without numbering. But in the next few weeks, we are going to release something that will actually solve this problem, that will give you an automatic number if you wish to do so. Hope this answered the question.
Great, thank you.
So when the change request is approved, meaning that it has been reviewed and everybody involved said, yes, let's go ahead and make this change, then you can go and start a proper review and approval process. In this case, you can assign to review as many people as you want. Everybody has access to the system. People, if you assign them, they will automatically have access to this document. They can go in, they can edit it. There is a very nice functionality where you can actually have concurrent editing, so you can have 3 or 4 people working at the same time, the same document, and actually the system will show you what each of them is doing real time. So it's really, really good. Once everybody is happy with the content and there is an agreement, okay, fine, let's get it for approval, they can click review complete, and you go into the formal approval. Again, you can select as many people as you want. You can assign them role if you wish to do so. And in this case, now we're talking about electronic signatures, okay? So the electronic record is every object that is here, every page that is here, even the spaces, these are electronic records. This is the electronic signatures. So the way I execute my electronic signature, in this case, it can be customized, but in this case, the requirement is to put in my username and password. To 21 CFR 11, basically, it's a longer discussion, but the minimum would be to be logged in and to be prompted to put in at least a password, not necessarily just username and password, but username and password is what most companies do. Less than a password is not an electronic signature. If you are really into security, or for whatever reason you want to bring the security to a higher level, there is the possibility to use a token. So you can install an authenticator on your phone. You'll receive a 6-digit token that refreshes every 30 seconds, and you use this to sign the document. Very secure, very impractical. So typically username and password is what everybody uses. You can add comments if you wish to your approval or rejection. When everybody has approved the document, it goes into a final QA approval. So the initial approval, the prior approval, you can have as many approvals as you want, and they are all in parallel. This one is in series. So again, you can assign as many people as you want, but you can only pick QA. So there is a system to define in Confluence or in MediCompli who in your company is a QA. You can sign for QA, and you can only select those people.
We have a question exactly on this topic actually now, Matteo, about assigning roles to people and being able to hard link the roles to particular people. Is that possible?
Not right now, but it's a good question. I have to think if there is a way to do it. But not in the current system. No, not in the current system. But it's a good question. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
There are information that we could be able to pull from the profile of a person, but I have to think about it, but not currently. Yeah. Anyway, when all QAs have approved it could be one than QA, then again, depending on what type of document, in this case, it is a procedure, so you probably need to train people before you release it because the approvals are complete, but you still have to release it to make it published, okay? You need to trigger a training to make sure that a certain number of people, is not necessarily always all of them or 100%, but a sufficient amount of people have been trained. And it could be as simple as read and understand, and in most cases it is. So we have this training module, which we will not have to go time to go through it today. It is not a learning management system yet, but it's a way to collect signatures and confirmation that people have completed the read and understanding, read and understand step. But when you have enough people trained that have confirmed the training, then it goes into the final approval step. Now, what's happening now? It is approved, so all the signatures are here. I'm just going to refresh the page so you can see the signatures. So at the bottom of the page, you have a summary of the approval. So version 1, the timestamp approved by these people, and QA, and the name of the QAs. This is kind of a summary of each version. Of course, if you are private, then it will become version 2, 3, and so forth. There are options here that you can select for every page. One of these is called page activity, and this is basically the audit trail of the page. So this will show you what happened in the workflow of the page at every single step. So you can see that we went through like a relatively simple process and very quick one, but there's already a good bit of information here. The problem is that when you get more version, you can understand that this becomes very not clutter, but there's a lot of information. It could be difficult to navigate and find the electronic signature here and who approved what and when. So if I go back to the page, that is the reason why we had this summary of the version and the approvals at the bottom of it. And it's something that is not editable. If you edit the content, this is not editable. If you export it, because the system can export in PDF, for example, this will be exported. Now, what happens if I'd like to keep a few minutes for open questions. Marian, are there many questions, or can I take another 4 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, we have just one question at the moment, but yeah, this is more the user related of how you
Okay, so let me finish here.
Yeah.
So the way it works now is that if you edit it, and I'm editing it, and as you can see, the content is only, it doesn't include electronic signature. The system creates a new version. So the way Confluence works is that stacks revision one on top of the other. It's not like files that you have on a computer that you may have one beside the other. These are one on the top of the other. So you have a single object and all the version always there. Never, they will never be lost, even the drafts. So what happens is that you have an approved version. There will be another draft version put on top of it. So this never gets lost. The fact that we have published it means that the published version is untouched because I haven't republished it. So people will still see the latest approved version. And while somebody else in the background here can work on a new version. The system works in the same identical way. So you'll go through the same steps. I'll just quickly go through them. But the way it will work is absolutely identical to what we've just seen earlier. Sorry. I have to enter username and password as approval, and then I'm going to assign QA approval to myself. Again, there is a way to be able to exclude or to prevent the fact that a single person can do all of this. It's just for simplicity. In the demonstration, I have permission to basically do all type of approvals, but there is a way to exclude people as well. So if I started a document, for example, I can't be the QA approver, for example. I go into training again, and then if I submit it for approval, then it will work in the same identical way. So it's still approving it. I have a link to the approved version. Now it's still publishing it, so it probably hasn't updated it yet. So it's still in version 1, so you can see that it hasn't been edited. It's still working on it. So I'm going back to this version. What I'm going to show you now is that how to obsolete a document. So previous versions are automatically obsoleted. So the fact that the system stacks them one on top of the other means that the older version will go down and will not be visible to the general user. But say that you want to get rid of a procedure altogether, you can't just delete it, okay? It's not acceptable. You have to keep the history of your quality system, even for something that you don't use anymore. And I'll just refresh it. you can see that there is a new version here. And now I can, as an admin or as a QA, I can submit it for approval. The system process is very similar to what we've just seen. So you have 2 approval steps, but you don't have a collaboration or review, because once you obsolete a document, you just obsolete it. You don't have to change it. You have a generic approval, then you have the QA approval. Of course, there is no training for the obsolete of a document. It just disappears. At least disappears in terms of the for the end user. It is not deleted. So it's very clear that the document is obsolete. I'm just going to refresh it so you can see what happens in terms of signatures. It shows you that version 2 was obsolete. It is not approved, of course, and it is still publishing it. But when it will be finished, the document in the publish space will be hidden by view other than to admin. So I will still be able to see it, but the normal user will not be able to see the document anymore. And this is what happens, and this is how we obsolete documents. So we have 5 minutes left. You said there was at least one question that.
I mean, it's an interesting question. I think so. How do you prevent people accidentally choosing wrong reviewers?
At the moment, the system is open, but this should be proceduralized, meaning that the QA role is also to make sure that the correct approvers were selected based on the document approval matrix, for example. Otherwise, there is a way to do it. It's not extremely practical. We are working on that, but there is a way to make sure that or at least each type of document has a certain number of approvers that you have to select. But this means also that you have to indicate, for example, that a certain person is in a group of, I don't know, device engineering. So you have to make sure that you bucket the people in the correct groups. Because as I said, you don't want to constrain yourself into having the same person approve the document, but you need to make sure that the same function approve the document. So the same group of users, you should be able to select one or more of those. It can be done.
Okay.
Just to say that it can be done is not very simple, but it can be done.
Yeah, I think we can move on from there. There's an interesting kind of a wider question about what is your suggestion as best practices for example, if there is a change in software, what is the process that should be followed in the eQMS creating a change or creating a Jira issue that is linked to that change request and related and linked again to a test report. So what is the best practice here that should be followed?
So I'm assuming that the question, and the person who wrote can answer me, is related to a change post-launch. Because here we're talking mainly product changes post-launch. During development, you know, the situation is a bit more fluid. Okay. The way it would be done.
I'm just going to
Hello, can you hear me?
Philippe talk about this a bit more.
Hello, can you hear me, Bob?
Yeah, yep. We can hear you.
Great, awesome. Thank you very much for answering all my questions.
No
so, for example, I agree. Let's assume post-launch, and we got some feedback. A button needs to be changed. It needs to be red instead of blue, whatever. And then I understand that there is a sequence of things that need to happen. There needs to be a change order. This change order needs to describe exactly what you do, why you do it, etc. And then on the software side, we want to create a ticket so that the developers understand what needs to be done. They develop code, they push code, there is code review, etc. There are unit tests or whatever other tests carried out. And then at the end, this change becomes active. And my question was, if there's an illustration of this, maybe, what this could look like in the eQMS.
Okay, I don't have an illustration ready for that, but I can describe you. Forget about this specific QMS. In general, the way it should be done is a very practical way. You have to show that you control a change. And you can, in general, define two types of changes. Small changes, like you said, well, they want a button that is a bit bigger. And there could be changes that it's, oh, we add a completely new feature, okay? Big chunk of work. So what I would do is go through the change management process, and then the change management process, at the end of it, the change management process is flexible enough, and even the way it is defined by the regulation is flexible enough, then it doesn't tell you how you implement it. So you can say that it's a big project, then you can create a new project, simply like that, and the change request sits on top of the project. So you execute a process, at the end, you close your change request, and this will take care of everything, regression, testing, and everything else. But say that is a small change like that, so you can use the template or the change request system itself to do all the steps. Okay, I have a change. I don't know if this can trigger a changes requirement. Probably not. If it's something very simple like that, I want just a button to be a bit bigger. It's just an implementation. The other thing that can do, they will ask you, okay, what is the impact? What are the things that you have to change? So probably you will have to give a look at the risks, and then you probably have to give a look at, based on the change in the code, if you have good traceability, and you should have good traceability, you have Jira, say that if I change this button, what are the test cases that I run when I first release the product that I have to repeat? And probably you will need to add maybe a different test to make sure that the button has a certain size. So, as I said, assuming that you don't need to modify a requirement. If you have to modify requirements, it should be pretty easy, because then if you modify a requirement and you have in Jira, this is automatically should trigger or is linked to test cases and things like that. But otherwise, you can have your change request, your template, your form, and then you can link in Jira an item. I don't know, it depends what your best practices are. And then the developer will execute it, and then they basically, the developer should follow the steps that you have defined in the change request. And at the end of it, when it is everything has been verified, validated, and so forth, you re-release it and you close the change request. So everything there, it's bucketed inside a change request. It's a small change. So you don't need to trigger a new project, a new plan, and things like that. It's not necessary. You can just go in and say, okay, maybe I have to review my risk analysis. I review my requirements. I check if by changing the size of a button, I impact usability, human factors, things like that. But you don't trigger a new project. So I don't know if I kind of answered your question.
Okay, great. On this level, I think it makes total sense. And hopefully I can get a more deep dive into the exact feature, but we're already over time. So thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I just also wrote in the chat here that if anybody wants a more personalized, in-depth demo or call with us, then you're most welcome to email us. We have one question. I don't know if anybody has the time to wait, then can answer that. It is from Abdu about how do you implement training with
Okay,
MediCompli?
so in MediCompli we have, let me share it again. We didn't have time to go through that. Bit of a pity, but time is. So you have this training module, and the way it works is that you have a training record template that is part of your quality system. You create a new record using this template. I'm just going to do it very quickly. I'm not going to add any content right now, but just be aware that you can actually link people, and okay, it already exists, so call it 2. You can link people, you can mention people in a template in your document, and they will receive notification that you have mentioned them. And then the process, the way it works is that you define how much time you give for a certain training module. Typically it's 2 weeks, but you can change it to whatever you want, or you can change it to a fixed date. And then the system will ask you to complete the form, assuming that you have completed with all the required documents. And if it is a reader to understand, you just link it to the new version. And then you assign whoever, in this case, assigning myself. People will receive an email. I forgot to mention it earlier, but people receive an email when they are assigned to a certain task. It is also listed in the to-do list, and not right now, it will take a few seconds, but here you'll have, when you log in, you have the list of tasks assigned to you. You can have the option to assign a trainer, say that it was a classroom training, something like that, so you can actually assign a trainer, but it's not necessary. When people enter their electronic signature as a confirmation that they have executed it, they've read it, understood, or whatever. And then if there is no trainer, it just goes in training complete. And the home page of the space is actually a kind of a reporting page where it tells you, the number of training modules that are ongoing, the ones that have been completed, the ones that are overdue. So if these 2 weeks are overdue, then people receive an email, they come up here and it's overdue. You can run your KPI, your statistics for management review and things like that. As I said, it's not an LMS yet. It's a way to record the execution of training.
Great, thank you. One more question. There are more questions.
Oh,
how do you work with the attached files on a page? Are the same access restrictions on the Confluence page applied to the attached files on the page?
Yes, absolutely. I have to share it as well. This is probably will take not a full session, but to show you everything that you can do with an attachment may take a while, but actually will take a while. But in general, yes. So attachments are embedded inside a page. So in this case, I have no attachment. You can have an attachment that just sits as an attachment. So if I append a file here, it just sits here. But I can also ask the system to visualize it. So this is very useful. For example, if you have a Word file that you don't want to import and you want to keep it as a Word file, you can attach it, ask the system to visualize it in the main page. Of course, you will not be able to edit it directly, but there is a new feature that came out like a few months ago. It's called Atlassian Companion, and it works. I may need to find one, but it works with a check-in, check-out system. So you can edit Word file, Excel file, and PowerPoint files directly from the attachment. So you can actually click on the Word document, it downloads it, it opens it, you modify it, you save it, and it automatically uploads and checks it back in. So if you want to stick to, for example, Office files, you can definitely do that. But yes, in general, attachments are managed the same identical way. In addition, the system considers a change in the attachment as a change in the content. So if you go in the back and you change something, the system will think that you have changed the content, and it is done it on purpose, because otherwise you can change something in the attachment that is critical. So the system will react as if you were editing it and changing the system, the document.
Great, thank you. Great, but thank you everybody a lot for attending, and thank you, Matteo.